Good afternoon and welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Pate for Barlow High School. Today we're talking about World War II in Europe. So let's go ahead and get started with conflict over strategy. You've got three in the big three. You have three different strategies and viewpoints, and it creates a little conflict, but they eventually work it out. Here we go. The Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is under siege. The Nazis are 500 miles by 1942 into the Soviet territory, on the brink of major important cities like Leningrad in the north and Stalingrad in the middle. Well, the Soviet Union has one goal they're looking for under Stalin. That goal is they want to see the Americans and British invade somewhere in Western Europe so that they will have the support to have a two-front war, which means the Nazis would have to defend more heavily on both sides, more troops, and that would pull some off of the Eastern Front where they are absolutely on the brink. That's the Soviet viewpoint. Give me a Western Front and do it now. The second group is the Americans. The Americans are sitting there and they have, it's not on the map over here, but on the other side of the world, of course, they have a situation with Japan. And the American public wants to take on Japan more than they want to take on the Nazis. Why? Pearl Harbor. Okay, it's pretty obvious. It's a closer threat, in the Pacific to them than some fighting that's going on clear over in Europe. They are more concerned with that. With that being the case, the American public is kind of like, hey, we want to see some action with Japan. We want revenge. We want our vengeance on Japan. And frankly, if you're going to do something, Roosevelt and his main generals and advisors knew the American public, this was so remote in Europe. Yes, they were interested. Yes, they wanted to help Britain. But the American public wouldn't stand for a war that might be in the 5 to 10 year range. This was a major concern to them. Okay? So they're like, let's get trained, let's get ready in Britain, and then let's do this. Okay? Let's bring the action to the Germans. The British have a totally different viewpoint. Now keep in mind that the Americans came to the action in World War I really only in the last 6 to 8 months. They weren't involved for a lot of the war. They didn't experience years of the horror of trench warfare. They jump in at the end all energetic and, it wasn't fun for them, but it certainly wasn't the worst brunt of the impact, and it wasn't happening right in their backyard. They come in and say, let's just get it, roll up our sleeves and let's get after this. The British endured years of this in World War I. The British were traumatized, lost a huge amount of their population, and everything that's going on now is in their backyard, and they are worried about it. As this is going on, the British are going to say, and by the way, the British also had tried a smaller invasion attempt into Europe that already failed. Okay? So the British are going to say, we need to do something on the kind of peripheral areas to attack Germany and draw some of their troops away, and basically we want to wear them down. We're going to wear them down by aerial bombing raids into Germany and other defensive installations they have elsewhere. We're going to have a blockade, and we're going to try and stop them from getting supplies anywhere else. And yeah, they've got the resources of Europe, but at the same time, we're going to bomb away as many of those resources as we can so they can't use them, and combine those two things. It might take 5 to 10 years, but we can wait, and we would rather do that than just take massive casualties that we don't need to. Okay, so with that happening, the British, that's their viewpoint. So you now have three different views. Give me support now. We need to do this before too long. Let's start preparing. And the American view, and then of course the British, let's work around somewhere else and not directly attack. Now, this is not a coincidence that later on this is going to be something that really irritates Stalin. He's going to be very angry later on that they did not have that front emerge earlier and give some support to him. But what they end up settling on is the Churchill and the British are going to win the day on this, so to speak. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to bomb them, we're going to soften them up. And they eventually say, we need to attack in North Africa. Roosevelt really just goes along with this. The Americans have no strategic interest in North Africa other than it matters to the British. Why does it matter to the British? Because India and Egypt are the two major things the British are concerned about. Here's Egypt, and it through the Suez Canal is the lifeline to India. Those are the possessions they want to maintain a hold on and are most concerned about outside of their own homeland area. So what are the British going to do? They are going to do everything they can to desperately hold on to the territory in Egypt. So how are they going to go about doing this? They're going to do this basically in a couple of key battles that are going to emerge, and these include the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa. El Alamein, the Germans and Italians tried to push in, and they want to take Cairo, and then basically that would have been the linchpin that would have allowed them to take down British control of Egypt. They are not going to be successful. At the Battle of El Alamein, they're going to be repelled, and from that point on, they're going to be kind of on the defensive, and they're going to start getting pushed back across. This is Libya, okay? Out of Egypt into Libya, and the British are able to preserve and protect this. British not only have this out of interest to you, this is actually where the Suez Canal would be. If my map went down further, here's Israel. The Palestine-Israel area was also in the control of the British at this time. So that's, and then we get to Operation Torch. Operation Torch, you have 3 different locations where they have a massive amphibious invasion by American troops. And they're going to attack into Morocco and Algeria, which are right here and here. And you think, well, these had been French-controlled territories, so they would either be really easy to take down or, already waiting to be helpful. Except for the fact that there was Vichy France. Vichy France. The Germans wanted to control this whole border for defensive reasons, but they take kind of this interior southern portion of France. They take Nazi stooges who are willing to be a puppet government for them, and they are going to have those people rule the southern part of France and control the Morocco and Algeria areas. With that happening, Americans expected that the Vichy French would melt away and either give up quickly and not fight that hard, or be ready to join them and just have been people who were like trying to make it work. I have to imagine that for the Vichy French, they were not treated too kindly after the war ended by the loyalist French who were resisting or wishing they could resist. The people who cooperated and became the leaders in this government probably weren't treated too super well. So, Operation Torch is a success. They're able to finally break through after some vicious fighting against the Vichy French. They're able to break through and come toward Tunisia. Now, when that happens, you have kind of a pincer movement where you have the British and the Americans coming toward Tunisia, and they're eventually going to trap the Italian and German troops there. They're going to capture almost 250,000 troops, and this is obviously a big deal. They're going to get their tanks as well, and so that's a huge deal. They do have more troops are able to escape from Tunisia and go up toward Italy. They get out, then they do capture, but I mean they capture over 200,000. That's a very significant amount of troops. With that said, we move to the soft underbelly. Now you can see I've already crossed that out. Why have I crossed that out? Because essentially it's not that soft. The British then, after North Africa has been successfully, they've ejected the Axis presence from there, they're going to say, well, you know what, it would be so much easier to put a second front pressure coming up through Italy, liberate Italy, and put pressure on Vichy France instead of coming up here where the defenses are sure to be much stronger. They are just bent on avoiding any kind of a direct conflict. So with this going on, you're going to see essentially that they do attack up through Sicily, and then after they hit the mainland of Italy, you're going to see that the Italian government overthrows Mussolini, and they're wavering about whether to unconditionally surrender or not. Their troops are faltering and kind of dissipating their military groups. And when this happens, the Germans fill the gap, and they fly down through Italy and start doing the heavy fighting themselves. And they restore Mussolini to his throne temporarily, to his kind of being the emperor. And what's going to make this very tough fighting is you have the mountains successfully going up through Italy. And with that being the case, the Americans kind of fight and win one mountain, and then they have a little break, and then they get up to the next one. And the Germans are always in the good elevated positions, and it's very tough fighting all the way up. So Churchill said, oh, this is the soft underbelly, it'll be great. It's not a soft underbelly, and it's going to be very difficult, slow fighting moving up. They do peel off some people who go through Vichy France as well. Now this takes us to the Eastern Front, and I told you Stalin, you see 500-mile penetration into Soviet territory, and they want that second front. This is not satisfying them, even though it is drawing some German troops away. It's not enough, but they are able at Leningrad, crazy situation. They are essentially, Hitler's Hitler's orders are, wipe Leningrad off the face of the earth. 3 million people. And yet, the people of Leningrad fight courageously, and eventually they are able to escape over a frozen lake kind of behind the city, and they evacuate tons of people. The city never falls, but it comes really close to falling. Stalingrad, the namesake of their leader, he says, we will not see this city fall. They're going to have a desperate fight that lasts a really long time. Great movie about this, Enemy at the Gates, I believe it's called, about this fighting. And it kind of shows how unprepared the Soviet Union had been for war. They're not equipped and trained like the Germans. But it's going to show the gritty, heroic fighting nature that the Soviets brought to the Battle of Stalingrad and certainly Leningrad also. This is probably the number one turning point of the entire war. El Alamein was certainly a turning point because it saves Egypt and puts the Axis into retreat. But Stalingrad reverses course. After Stalingrad, after the Soviet Union wins, they slowly are going to be pushing back the entire rest of the war. Okay, with that said, we move. We've now covered the Eastern Front, and I've put an asterisk by these turning points. El Alamein and Stalingrad would be two of them. So we get to the Western Front, and with the Western Front, essentially what you see, you've got D-Day. And it's going to be an interesting thing. The Americans are going to be just agitating for this to happen. Stalin wants it to happen. Churchill can't make excuses for it not to happen anymore. It's in 1944. It's an election year for Roosevelt, going for the fourth term. The first person ever, of course. And Roosevelt needs to show some progress. Because a lot of Americans were like, start diverting more forces back to Japan. That's our biggest threat to America, at least. So Americans, they're going to attack. It's going to be launched under General Dwight Eisenhower. And when this occurs and Eisenhower's troops come through with this big Operation Overlord is what its nickname was, they have their weather stations out in the Pacific. And at this time, you don't have satellite data or radar or anything like that to pick up the weather. You had weather stations telling you what you could see. So the Germans have weather stations in Western France. And that's giving them the information they're using to make decisions about what the weather is going to be like coming in. But the Americans have it on boats out in the Pacific, and so do the British. They know what's coming that's further out. And they see there's going to be a break for about a day, maybe a day and a half in the weather, and that's when they launch. The Germans aren't prepared for this. They think some of their generals are actually taking a R&R holiday because they think the weather's so bad, as it had been for like a month and a half leading into D-Day, that there's no way the Americans will attack. It's just the weather's too bad, too rough to deal with coming across the channel even. But with this break, they launched their attack June 6, 1944. That is D-Day. The Americans get their beachhead, and Rommel, the great tank general of the Germans, had said, hey, if they ever get a beachhead, we're done. Well, the Americans get their beachhead, and that was prophetic by Rommel because now that they have a beachhead and established control around it, they can just continue to flood more and more troops across, now in no peril, until they get there, of course, to start fighting elsewhere. And they're going to start spreading out, trying to liberate Paris and the rest of France. And essentially what you get is they start shooting out in different directions. And by spreading out, their thought was the Germans would have to engage them in all of these areas. They kind of do, but they launch the counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge, which occurs near the German border. And they almost completely break through and put the Allies into a major retreat. It would have been a huge turning point for the Germans to try and hold on. But General Patton, a great tank commander for the United States Army, he is going to fill the gap, and that's kind of it. It exhausts the Germans. And you see, from this point, it's just kind of closing in on Berlin from both sides. It's kind of a race into Germany by the United States and by the Soviets. In terms of the treatment of the Germans when they capture that territory, that's a subject for a podcast in the future. But that's basically the action of World War II in Europe. Stay classy, Sam Barlow.